Harry Potter story from another's perspective. Rowan Barrows and the Forgotten Prophecy, Chapter 17, New Scars. Rowan woke to the soft sun glowing through tall windows. For a moment he thought he was still in the forest, the silvery light, the whispering air, but when he blinked, he saw white sheets, sunlight bleeding through thin curtains, and the smell of potions. The hospital wing. His body ached from head to toe, his arms felt heavy, and when he tried to sit up the room tilted alarmingly. "Easy now," came Madame Pomfrey's brisk voice. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Don't make me have to mend you all over again." 3 days, Rowan croaked. His throat felt like dry parchment. 3, she said firmly, setting a steaming mug of broth on the table beside him. "You're lucky to be here at all. Out in the forest, honestly, to go wandering off into there." Rowan blinked. How did I get back?" Madame Pomfrey's lips pursed. "You were found at the edge of the trees, in quite a state, I might add. I don't know what you were doing out there, but if I had my way, you'd be kept on a leash until the end of year." He managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am." She sniffed and swept away, leaving him alone with the broth of potion. He lay there for a long time, listening, trying to piece the night together. The chest, the light, the voice that had sounded both strange and familiar. But each time he tried to hold the memory, it slipped away like smoke. Then he heard them, voices at the far end of the ward. "And he'll make a full recovery?" Professor McGonagall's voice, sharp but soft with worry. "Given time," came Dumbledore's. Rowan froze. "He's just a boy, Albus," McGonagall said quietly. "They both are." Dumbledore sighed. "Yes, and both have seen things no boy should." Rowan frowned. "Both?" He tilted his head and caught a glimpse through the half-drawn curtain. 2 beds down, a boy with glasses sat propped up on pillows, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the boy everyone spoke about. Dumbledore had drawn close beside Harry's bed. He was speaking in that same gentle, knowing voice. The old wizard smiled kindly, his eyes bright behind the half-moon spectacles, and Harry leaned forward, hanging on every word. Something twisted in Rowan's chest. Of course, he thought bitterly. Harry Potter, again. He looked away, suddenly wishing he could sink through the bed. Perfect Harry Potter getting all the attention. Everyone knew that already. And here Rowan was, stuck halfway down the ward, forgotten. He turned his face toward the wall. He didn't notice the silence fall until the soft shuffle of footsteps stopped beside his bed. "Ah," said Dumbledore's voice quietly. "You're awake." Rowan turned, startled. The headmaster stood there smiling faintly, hands clasped behind his back. "How are you feeling, Mr. Barrows?" Rowan blinked, caught off guard. "Better, sir. Just sore." "I should imagine so." Dumbledore came close now. "You've been through rather more than most first-years manage in their entire time here." Rowan stared at him. You know?" "About the forest?" said Dumbledore, eyes twinkling. "Yes, about the chest. Some things have a way of revealing themselves at the proper time." Rowan hesitated. "I didn't mean to find it." "I know," Dumbledore said kindly. "But sometimes, Mr. Barrows, the things we find by accident are the ones we most needed to. Besides, I don't think you had much choice in finding it or not." They sat in silence for a while, the sun gleaming through the glass. Rowan could still hear faint voices down the hall. Then Dumbledore said quietly, "You're very lucky you have such good friends to seek help when you needed it most." Rowan blinked in confusion. "Who?" he asked. "Young Cedric Diggory. He warned me," said Dumbledore softly. "I then enlisted some friends to help find you whilst I helped young Harry Potter over there." Rowan didn't know what to say. Cedric went looking for help for him. Dumbledore rose to his feet, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a faint smile. "Rest now." The school year is not over, and you'll need your strength for the feast." Will I be in trouble?" Rowan asked hesitantly. "Only if you insist on finding more trouble," Dumbledore said lightly. "As it stands, I think you've had quite enough adventure for 1 year." He turned, his robes whispering across the floor, and was gone. Rowan lay still for a long time afterward, staring up at the rafters, the rain still pattering against the glass. The jealousy in his chest was gone now, replaced by something steadier, a quiet warmth, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Rowan didn't know how long he'd been asleep before he woke to the sound of whispering. The hospital wing was bathed in morning light, all soft gold and floating dust motes. It smelled faintly of spell polish and Madame Pomfrey's sharp, herbal potions. His arms ached, heavy and strange, and when he moved, the whispering stopped. "See? Told you he'd wake soon," said Ollie's voice somewhere nearby. "Pay up, Justin." "I'm not paying," came Justin's scandalised reply. "You said yesterday." "Technicalities," Ollie said cheerfully. "He's awake, isn't he?" Rowan cracked open one eye. "You're both so loud." That was enough to set the whole group off. Ollie, Justin and Ernie all crowded around his bed in relief. Cedric stood just behind them, smiling, and even Margot was there, perched on the end of a nearby bed, her book open on her knees. Hovering proudly near the ceiling, the grey squire looked ready to burst with joy. "Ah, the brave knight lives! I knew the foe would not claim him while the grey squire keeps watch." Rowan's eyes immediately drifted toward Ollie's arm. The heavy bandages were gone now, replaced by angry pink skin disappearing beneath his rolled sleeve. "You okay?" Rowan asked quietly. Ollie blinked, clearly caught off guard. "With the burns, I mean." For one brief second, the usual grin slipped slightly from Ollie's face, then he shrugged one shoulder. "Madame Pomfrey says I'll survive tragically," he said. Justin snorted. A faint smile tugged at Rowan's mouth, relief loosening something tight in his chest. "Good," he murmured. Ollie looked at him for another second before his grin returned properly. "You're one to talk," he said. "You vanished into the Forbidden Forest and came back looking like you arm-wrestled a troll." Madame Pomfrey appeared from her office at the noise, hands on her hips. "He needs rest, not a celebration. 5 minutes, no more." "Plenty of time," Ollie said brightly. "We've got at least 4.5 minutes to tell him every ridiculous rumour that's gone around since he was gone." Cedric stepped forward, his tone gentler. "You scared us all, Rowan. Half the house has been asking after you. Sprout's been fussing like she raised you herself." Rowan smiled faintly. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." "Too late for that," Ollie said. Rowan laughed weakly, then winced. His chest throbbed sharply. He glanced down. The bandages wrapped around his upper arms and chest. Creeping out from beneath, pale scars twisted across his shoulders and chest like faint trails of red. They ached softly in the sunlight, as if the orb had burned. He stretched his arms carefully. They didn't hurt anymore, but they didn't feel like they used to either. Heavier somehow. Cedric caught his look and frowned. "You all right, mate?" Rowan nodded quickly. "Yeah, just sore." Margot had stopped writing and was watching quietly, a thoughtful crease between her brows. "Scars make good stories," she said softly. He couldn't help thinking about Margot kneeling beside him in the forest, dirt smeared across her sleeves, fear trembling in her voice while the clearing burned with light around them. She'd gone because of him, gotten hurt because of him, and if things had gone differently, Rowan pushed the thought away before it could settle properly. Across the bed, Margot had already lowered her eyes back to her book again, though Rowan noticed she hadn't turned a page in quite a while. Rowan wasn't sure what to say, so he said nothing. He only gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The grey squire puffed up his chest. "A mark of honour, young Rowan. Proof of a deed most valiant. Why, I shall compose a ballad. The blazing chest of the bold Barrows." "Please don't," Ollie groaned, earning a glare from Madame Pomfrey and a suppressed laugh from Rowan. Cedric clapped Rowan lightly on the shoulder. "Just glad you're all right. That's what matters." As the minutes slipped away, Madame Pomfrey herded them all toward the door. "Out! Before I dose the lot of you with dream draught." The boys and Margot shuffled out reluctantly, still talking over each other. The Grey Squire lingered at the door, removing his spectral helm in a grand sweeping bow. "Rest easy, good sir. The realm owes you one." Then he drifted through the wall, humming something suspiciously like a victory march. When the ward fell quiet again, Rowan looked down at his chest once more. The scars shimmered faintly in the afternoon light, curling like vines across his palms. He traced one absently with his thumb and thought of the chest, the light, the voice. He didn't understand what had happened, but he knew one thing for certain. It wasn't over. The great hall had never looked so bright. Golden plates gleamed under floating candles, banners in the colours of every house rippled along the walls, and the air hummed with the sound of hundreds of excited voices. Summer was close enough to taste. Even the ghosts seemed lighter than usual, drifting lazily between tables like silvery balloons. Rowan sat with the rest of the Hufflepuffs halfway down the long table, his bandaged hands resting on the edge of his plate. Madame Pomfrey had finally released him that morning, much to her own disapproval, but Professor Sprout had insisted he be allowed to attend the feast. "He's earned a good meal at least," she'd said with a fond look that made Rowan feel both proud and guilty all at once. Ollie was beside him, already piling his plate high. "I heard we're third in the House Cup standings," he said around a mouthful of roast potato. "That's practically second place if you think about it." "That's not how that works," Rowan replied, smiling faintly. Cedric leaned across the table from a few seats down. "Don't listen to him, Rowan. He's been saying that all week." Ollie shrugged. Optimism's a gift. Before Rowan could answer, the great hall fell quiet. Professor Dumbledore had risen from his seat at the staff table, twinkling eyes sweeping the hall. His voice carried easily over the crowd. "Another year gone," he began, "and what a year it has been." Laughter rippled through the room. Rowan listened, smiling along as Dumbledore praised the effort, bravery and curiosity of his students, though something in the way he said curiosity made Rowan glance down at his plate. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. "The points stand thus," said Dumbledore cheerfully. "In 4th place, Gryffindor, with 312 points. 3rd place," Dumbledore continued, "Hufflepuff, with 352. A polite round of applause went up from the Hufflepuff table, led by Professor Sprout, who beamed proudly anyway. 2nd place, Ravenclaw, with 426. And in 1st place, he paused, eyes twinkling, Slytherin, with 472 points exactly. A roar of approval went up from the Slytherin table. Their green and silver banners shimmered triumphantly above the hall. But Dumbledore wasn't finished. "However," he said, his tone softening, "recent events must be taken into account." A murmur swept the room. "Mr. Ronald Weasley," Dumbledore said, "for the best played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in many years. 50 points. The Gryffindor table erupted. Miss Hermione Granger, for cool logic in the face of fire. 50 points. More cheers. "Mr. Harry Potter," Dumbledore went on, "for pure nerve and outstanding courage. 60 points. The Gryffindor table exploded with noise. Red and gold banners shimmered into existence overhead, drowning the green and silver. Gryffindors were on their feet, hugging, cheering, pounding the tables. Even some of the other houses were clapping. Rowan clapped too, though his hands smarted slightly. He didn't begrudge Harry the points. Not really. But part of him couldn't help thinking about the forest, the chest, the way his chest and arm still ached, bore with scars from something no one would ever know about. No 50 points for bravery there. He didn't say it aloud, of course. He just smiled and took another bite of treacle tart while Ollie grumbled under his breath about fairness and house bias. Even Margot, sitting a few seats down, rolled her eyes and muttered something about Dumbledore and his golden boy, earning a half smile from Rowan. By the time the hall began to empty, he found himself laughing again. The sting of disappointment faded under the warmth of noise and friendship. The chatter, the clatter, the smell of pudding and candle wax and victory that didn't quite belong to him but didn't feel entirely out of reach either. He had had a strange year, strange and secret, and a little bit wonderful. As they left the hall, Cedric caught up with him at the door and clapped a hand to his shoulder. Next year's hours, Barrows, Hufflepuff will show them yet. Later that evening, the castle felt strangely quieter. The celebrations had faded into the background now. Somewhere along the corridor, Rowan could hear distant laughter and the sound of trunks being dragged across stone floors as students prepared to leave. Back in the Hufflepuff dormitory, most of the boys had already begun packing. Ollie was attempting to fit 3 times as many books about strange creatures into his trunk as should have been physically possible. It'll fit. It won't. It absolutely will. A loud crack echoed through the room. Ollie stared at the broken latch. Rowan shook his head and returned to his own packing. His trunk sat open on the end of his bed. Carefully he folded robes between stacks of parchment and textbooks. The year seemed scattered across the mattress around him. A battered gobstone set, a handful of chocolate frog cards, letters from home tied neatly together with string. A dragon field guide covered in Ollie's notes that had somehow ended up amongst Rowan's belongings again. For a moment he simply sat there. The room looked different now, smaller. When he had first arrived, Hogwarts had felt impossibly huge. Now he knew where the hidden shortcuts were, knew which staircases liked to change direction, knew where Professor Sprout kept the best plants, knew which corridors to avoid if Filch was nearby. It felt less like a castle now, more like home. The thought made something tighten slightly in his chest. Soon he'd be back in the Muggle world, back to roads and cars and ordinary people, back to Eleanor asking 1,000 questions before he'd even made it through the front door, back to Mum and Dad, back to Puck. A faint smile crossed his face, then something moved, a low ticking sound. Rowan frowned. The compass sitting near the edge of his bed twitched. Once, then again. Slowly the needle began to turn. Rowan sat upright. The compass had been completely still ever since it had found the chest hidden in that strange room. Now the needle pointed firmly across the dormitory, toward the small clay pot sitting on his bedside table. Rowan blinked. For a second nothing happened. Then a tiny crack appeared in the soil. He leaned forward. Another crack followed. The dark earth shifted gently, and from the centre of the pot something green emerged. A tiny shoot pushed through the soil, unfolding slowly into the night air. Rowan watched in silence. The little plant couldn't have been more than a few inches tall. 2 tiny leaves unfurled, delicate, fragile, alive. The compass needle settled immediately, still pointing at the sapling. For a long moment Rowan simply stared. After everything that had happened this year, the whispers, the chest, the forest, the scars still faintly visible beneath his shirt, it felt strangely fitting that the final mystery waiting for him had been something growing quietly beside his bed the entire time. Not dangerous, not frightening, just waiting. The tiny leaves shifted slightly as though stretching toward the light. Rowan reached out carefully and touched one with the tip of his finger. A soft smile appeared on his face. Whatever the seed eventually became, it had survived, just like he had. Outside the round dormitory window, the last sunlight of the school year faded slowly across the grounds, and for the first time in a long while, Rowan felt ready for whatever came next. The Scarlet steam engine gave a long, echoing whistle, as trunks were hauled aboard and owls hooted impatiently from their cages. Sunlight shimmered across the platform at Hogsmeade Station, painting the carriages gold. It was the kind of morning that made even goodbyes feel softer. Rowan stood on the platform, guitar case slung over one shoulder, Sebastian's empty perch strapped to his trunk. "Don't forget your potions notes," Ollie called, wrestling his suitcase into the overhead rack. "I'm not lending you mine next year. You always get ink on them." Cedric appeared beside them, taller than ever, looking like he'd spent the entire year growing into the role of a proper Hogwarts hero. "See you both next term," he said with a grin. "Try not to get into trouble before then." "No promises," Ollie said. The whistle blew again, sharper this time. Steam billowed across the platform, wrapping the train in a misty curtain. Margot jogged past their carriage window, clutching that book to her chest. She paused when she spotted them through the glass and gave a brief, crooked wave, before vanishing into the next carriage. Ollie raised an eyebrow. "You think she ever puts that book down when we're not looking?" Rowan shrugged, hiding a small grin. The train gave a great lurch, wheels clattering to life, and the platform began to slide away. The castle glimmered in the distance, its turrets catching the sunlight one last time before the bend in the tracks hid it from view. They fell into a comfortable silence. Cedric waved from the next compartment before disappearing to join some older students. Ollie yawned and stretched out across the seat, already pulling a chocolate frog from his pocket. Rowan sat back, fingers resting lightly on the guitar case beside him. It still amazed him, this strange, wild year. Outside, the countryside rolled by in a blur of green and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a village smoke rose from chimneys, and Rowan wondered what his mother and Eleanor would say when they saw him. Taller, thinner, full of stories he could never quite tell. He opened the guitar case, plucked a soft, familiar chord, and smiled as the train rattled on. It wasn't the kind of story people would sing about. Not yet, anyway. But it was his. And as Hogwarts faded into the horizon, Rowan Barrows began to play.